I want you to close your eyes for just a second. Well, assuming you're not driving right now.
Right. Please keep your eyes on the road if you are.
Yeah, definitely safety first. But if you can, imagine a moment deep, deep in our human past, the exact second just after the very first human beat was struck.
It's an incredible thing to try and picture, isn't it?
It really is. And what stands out in that moment isn't what's there, but what's entirely missing. There's no writing, no sheet music.
No speakers.
Exactly. No speakers, no microphones, no cloud servers humming in the background. It's highly likely there wasn't even a conceptual word for music yet.
Yeah, the concept just didn't exist.
Right. There was simply a human voice, a physical body, a rhythm, and another human being just present to listen.
It really forces a complete reset of how we think about sound today. Because when you're stripped of the modern industrial complex, stripped of commerce and streaming algorithms, you are left with just the raw acoustic reality of human presence.
Just biological organisms manipulating the air pressure in a shared physical space.
Exactly. That's all it is at its core.
Okay, let's unpack this, because that image is the foundational starting point for our deep dive today. We spent a lot of time on this show exploring how early humans utilized sound mechanically, right? Like grunts for warning or specific calls for hunting.
The very utilitarian stuff.
Yeah, the basic survival tools. But the source material we are diving into today tackles a much more complex mystery. We want to know how those isolated utilitarian sounds morphed into the actual architecture of society itself.
And it brings up such a fascinating historical paradox.
It really does. The paradox is this. When writing was invented, which was this revolutionary technology explicitly designed to store and transmit information across time and space, music didn't disappear.
Which runs counter to almost every pattern of technological evolution we have.
Right.
Usually when a highly efficient tool emerges for a specific task, the older, less efficient tool is just discarded.
Like how we abandoned stone tools for bronze.
Exactly. Or how we abandoned the telegraph the second we got the telephone. But music didn't just survive the invention of the alphabet. It survived the printing press, the Industrial Revolution, and, the advent of global fiber optic networks.
And I want to point this out directly to you, the listener. Consider your own environment right now.
Right.
We exist in an era dominated by artificial intelligence, endless digital streaming, and instantaneous data retrieval.
You literally have access to the totality of human knowledge right in your pocket.
Right. But you still sing lullabies to your children to calm them down.
Yeah.
You still sing along to the radio in your car. You'll go stand in a stadium with 50,000 other people and chant in perfect unison.
It's wild when you frame it like that.
So the question is why? With all of our advanced cognitive tools, why are we still engaging in this primal acoustic behavior?
Well, the source text argues that answering that question requires completely dismantling our basic assumptions about what music actually is. We tend to view it as entertainment or, just art.
Like a lechery.
Exactly. But the text frames it as a fundamental biological and sociological necessity.
So we're going to trace that necessity all the way from its origin. We're looking at how the simple act of sharing a beat evolved into the scaffolding for cultural memory, how it defined the invisible boundaries of religion and identity, how it actually weaponized human bodies for war.
That part is intense.
Oh, it's fascinating. And finally, how it eventually externalized itself into the digital data streams we use today, all while remaining inextricably chained to the human nervous system.
So to start, the true origin point is that transition from a solitary acoustic event to a synchronized collective state. The text uses this brilliantly minimalist description. Picture this. One person claps their hands. A single sharp sound. Pa.
Just a random noise.
Right. Then a second person joins. Then a third. And suddenly it crosses this invisible threshold. It ceases to be individual random noise and locks into a collective rhythm.
The mechanics of that lock-in are what I find so compelling. When that second and third person join the clapping, they aren't just independently making noise in the same proximity.
No, not at all.
There is a complex, almost entirely subconscious negotiation happening in their brains. People naturally begin to adjust their physical timing to match one another.
They modify their breathing patterns even.
Yeah, their breathing, they modulate the volume of their clap, the pitch of their vocalizations. They are literally physically aligning their biological machinery to enter the exact same time structure.
If you look at the neuroscience behind this, it's known as rhythmic entrainment. The auditory cortex is picking up the external rhythm, and it forms this rapid, incredibly dense loop with the motor cortex.
So your brain and your muscles are just constantly talking to each other.
Exactly. Your brain is calculating the interval between the claps, anticipating the exact millisecond the next sound will occur, and sending signals to your muscles to move so your hands meet at that precise microsecond.
That's incredible.
And when a group of humans does this simultaneously, individual prediction becomes collective prediction.
I was trying to conceptualize this physical alignment earlier, and the closest modern equivalent I could think of is walking on a crowded city sidewalk.
Oh, that's a great way to look at it.
Right, because you are walking down the street and a stranger is walking right next to you. Without any eye contact or verbal agreement whatsoever, your footsteps synchronize.
You fall into the exact same stride.
You completely fall into it. Your individual momentum merges into a shared momentum, and it's based on this unspoken social contract executed entirely by your bodies.
What's fascinating here is that the sidewalk analogy perfectly illustrates the gravitational pull of shared rhythm. It actually requires cognitive energy to actively avoid synchronizing once you're exposed to a strong beat.
Like you have to try not to walk in step with them.
Yes. You have to force yourself to break the rhythm. The social power of music isn't in just the passive reception of sound waves, it's in the active, simultaneous cognition of the future.
Okay, the idea of predicting the future together is a really heavy concept. Walk me through the mechanics of that.
Sure, so a rhythm is essentially just a pattern of time, right? When a beat is established, your brain maps that pattern. And because it's a pattern, you know exactly what is going to happen next.
You know when the next beat is dropping.
Exactly. Now scale that up. If you have 50 people sitting around a fire, all clapping to a beat, you have 50 distinct human brains aiming their cognitive processing power at the exact same millisecond of the future.
Wow.
You have completely unified their perception of time.
So they are essentially existing in a manufactured, shared dimension of time.
Yes, and that shared temporal dimension is the absolute prerequisite for collective action. If a group of humans can collectively predict the next moment, they know exactly when to move, when to exert force, when to vocalize.
So sound transforms from an expression of individual state into a massive organizing mechanism for group behavior.
Precisely. It's the engine of organization.
And if a shared beat allows early humans to predict the next moment together, that creates an incredibly robust framework for organizing really high-stakes behavior. We see this applied most distinctly in how ancient societies managed their most vital moments.
Which is rituals.
Exactly, rituals.
Rituals require intense, synchronized coordination to function properly. A disorganized ritual is just a crowd of people standing around.
The source text goes deep into this mechanism, referring to rhythm as a time device within ritualistic contexts. It wasn't just background ambiance to set a spooky mood,
No, it wasn't a soundtrack.
Right, it was the physical engine moving time forward. The rhythm dictated not only the content of the action, like the specific words or movements, but the exact execution time.
It signaled when the crowd was supposed to respond to the shaman or the leader.
And when the entire group needed to shift from one phase of the ceremony to the next.
The timing there relies so heavily on repetition. You see this across almost all global cultures. You have repetitive melodies, repetitive chants, repetitive physical swaying.
Like a trance state.
Exactly like a trance state. Because this repetition triggers a measurable physiological shift. Extended rhythmic repetition literally lowers your cortisol, it increases endorphins, and it alters your brainwave states.
Wait, really? It changes your brainwaves.
It does. It essentially forces a cognitive break from mundane reality.
So it builds this acoustic wall.
A very clear, invisible boundary. You might be standing in the dirt of your normal settlement, dealing with the daily struggle for calories and basic survival. But the moment the ceremonial drum is struck or the collective chant begins, that acoustic threshold is crossed.
The mundane space is instantly redefined as sacred space.
Governed by entirely different rules of behavior.
The text highlights something crucial here about why acoustic tools, music, and rhythm were deployed for this rather than just spoken language. Because religious and ritualistic frameworks deal with concepts that are fundamentally beyond the descriptive capacity of everyday language.
They're too big for words.
Right. We are talking about the mechanics of the cosmos, the realm of ancestors, the very nature of divinity. Words are often just too granular and specific to capture the overwhelming scale of those ideas.
Language is explicitly designed to categorize and differentiate things. If you try to explain the infinite nature of the cosmos or the concept of an afterlife using standard vocabulary, you reduce it to a set of data points.
It loses its power.
Exactly. The text makes the argument that music did not attempt to explain the invisible world logically. Instead, it provided a vehicle for humans to physically experience their physiological reactions to that invisible world.
So instead of someone giving a lecture on the nature of a deity, the rhythm induces a physical state of awe or reverence. The logic centers completely bypass the neocortex and hit the autonomic nervous system.
You feel it before you think about it.
I do find myself stumbling over the permanence of this, though. If music is incredibly effective at manufacturing these intense, sacred emotional states during the ritual, what happens the morning after?
That's the million-dollar question.
Right. Without scriptures or written codices to store these revelations, it seems like the profound feeling would just dissipate the moment the acoustic vibrations stopped.
Well, the feeling didn't dissipate because the acoustic structure itself functioned as the storage medium. The song wasn't just the trigger for the ritual, it became the actual container for the cultural knowledge generated by the ritual.
The music itself was the hard drive,
The music was the hard drive.
which opens up the entire concept of cultural memory. Before the externalization of memory into written text, a society's survival depended entirely on the biological storage capacity of human brains.
And human memory is notoriously flawed.
Exactly. But they had to remember navigational maps, complex genealogies, botanical knowledge like toxic versus medicinal plants, historical mythologies. All of this had to be memorized.
And a structured song, with its predictable meter, its rhyme schemes, and its rhythmic cadences, acts as the ultimate mnemonic scaffolding.
Meter and rhyme severely restrict your word choice.
Hmm.
Like if you forget a line in a spoken story, you might substitute a different word and slowly alter the data over a few generations.
Which happens all the time in oral storytelling without music.
Right, but if the word must rhyme with the previous line, and it has to fit a strict 4-4 rhythmic pattern, the structure aggressively corrects errors. It protects the integrity of the data.
The source text insists on a vital distinction here, though. We cannot reduce the function of ancient music to just a biological USB drive for dry data.
It wasn't just storing grocery lists or hunting routes.
No, it stored the emotional resonance of that data. It stored the physical sensation of the ritual. It stored the context of the memory.
Context is key. A melody is deeply entangled with episodic memory. The sound is linked to the temperature of the air, the scent of the fire, the physical proximity of the specific people you were actually singing with.
It's a full-body memory.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. The text applies this entanglement to the most profound human threshold of all, which is death.
Yeah, this part of the source material is deeply moving.
It is. Death is inherently an individual biological event. The organs fail, the consciousness ceases. But for the surrounding society, death is a massive collective trauma. And the Force argues that singing during a funeral rite prevents grief from acting as an isolating force.
Look at the mechanics of a collective dirge. When the community gathers and initiates a song of mourning, the physiological burden of grief is literally distributed among the crowd.
The rhythm forces the living to breathe at the exact same pace.
It forces their vocal cords to vibrate at the same frequencies. It places the entire community in a unified physical state, which ensures the immediate family of the deceased is not left to process the emotional weight in a vacuum.
The long-term implications of that are just staggering. The text posits that when a community member hears that specific funeral melody, say 5 or 10 years later, it reactivates the emotional presence of the deceased with a visceral intensity that written text just cannot achieve.
It's completely different from reading a record.
Right. If I look at a genealogical record, a piece of paper that reads, grandfather deceased 1998, I am processing a piece of historical trivia. But if I hear the exact melody that 50 people sang over his gravesite, my nervous system replicates the physical sensation of his loss.
It is the fundamental difference between archiving a fact and archiving an experience. A written date provides the coordinates of a death. The melody reconstructs the emotional reality of the person.
It tethers the memory of the individual directly to the nervous systems of the living community.
And if an acoustic structure has the psychological power to bind the living to the dead with that level of intensity, it stands to reason it has immense power to bind the living to each other.
And that dynamic inevitably creates boundaries. You cannot have a defined inside without an outside.
Which introduces the sociological function of genre and the construction of identity.
The source illustrates how sharing highly specific musical traits like a particular rhythmic syncopation, a unique vocal timbre, or specific instrumentation forges a fierce sense of us.
It creates a highly recognizable in-group.
Yeah. And the text pulls this out of ancient history and applies it to modern subcultures, pointing to genres like jazz, punk, hip-hop, techno, reggae, house, and amapiano.
Because none of those genres are merely acoustic categories defined by a tempo or a chord structure. They are totalizing cultural systems.
To listen to and participate in a specific genre is to adopt its history. It dictates sociolinguistic markers, aesthetic choices in clothing, spatial geography.
Like which streets you inhabit or which underground clubs you have access to.
I look at the exclusionary nature of this, though, and it has a dark side. A unifying mechanism is, by its very nature, a mechanism for exclusion. If a specific syncopated rhythm defines the U.S., then failing to grasp that rhythm instantly exposes you as them.
You cannot bluff your way through a complex polyrhythm or a highly specific cultural dance.
No, your body betrays your lack of belonging immediately.
It's a very harsh physical exposure. The acoustic markers of an in-group function almost like a biological shibboleth. The exact same frequency that provides a deep, warm sense of security and belonging to those inside the circle creates an impenetrable wall for those on the outside.
The text is very clear that music is not inherently a force for universal harmony.
Not at all.
Yeah.
It is an amplifier of tribal dynamics. It rapidly accelerates both inclusion and exclusion.
So humanity engineers this tool, a tool capable of instantly binding thousands of individuals into a unified, synchronized, emotionally synchronized mass, sharply defined against anyone outside the group.
And once you have that tool,
Right. When you scale that capability, you are no longer just organizing a village ritual. You are building the architecture for civilization's most extreme logistical endeavors.
you are building the machinery of war and the state.
The text explicitly links the mechanics of the shared beat to military logistics. Before the invention of reliable radio communication, how do you maneuver 50,000 human bodies across miles of chaotic terrain?
It's a logistical nightmare.
You use military bands, you use massive percussive instruments and rhythmic cadence, you use sound waves to literally align the physical gait of massive armies.
From a purely logistical standpoint, a snare drum or a marching chant solves the problem of spatial coordination perfectly. It ensures the left foot of 10,000 infantrymen strikes the ground at the exact same millisecond
Which maximizes forward momentum.
and prevents the physical collapse of the formation.
But the text digs beneath the logistics into the psychological manipulation. The acoustic environment of an army doesn't just manage the feet, it manages the endocrine system.
Hormones.
Yes. The music manufactures the specific psychology required for lethal conflict. It spikes adrenaline, it suppresses fear, it builds an overwhelming sense of collective invulnerability.
The sheer acoustic force of a synchronized army rolling across the landscape is a weapon in itself. The collective mass becomes audible.
You can hear them coming from miles away.
And that low-frequency vibration of thousands of marching boots and drums travels through the ground, triggering deeply rooted predator response instincts in the enemy long before the army is even visible.
The application of this extends directly into political movements and the mobilization of civil society, too. Think about national anthems, union strikes, or protest songs.
It's the same mechanism.
Exactly. I consider the physiological difference between consuming a political ideology via text versus consuming it via song. If I read a dense political manifesto in my living room, I am engaging in a solitary intellectual decoding of symbols.
Even if you agree with the text, your body remains entirely passive.
Exactly. But if I am standing in a public square with 5,000 people chanting a rhythmic slogan of resistance, my body is physically enacting the ideology in real time.
And that physical enactment fundamentally alters how the ideology is stored in the brain. The melody and the rhythm act as an adhesive, binding the political grievance or the national identity into your deep memory centers.
You might struggle to recall the specific policy arguments of a labor movement a decade later.
But you will instantly remember the cadence and the physical sensation of the chant on the picket line.
Yes. And as technology evolves, those politically charged acoustic memories are perfectly formatted to be recorded, duplicated, and transmitted across borders, essentially weaponizing the song on a global scale.
But this narrative trajectory hits a massive complication in the historical record.
It does. We have established that music was the primary operating system for early human society, managing memory, ritual, identity, and power. Then, a fundamental disruption occurs: the invention of writing.
The externalization of human thought into visual space.
Right. Writing allows a society to encode infinitely complex data, decouple it from the human body, set it across oceans, and preserve it for millennia without relying on the fragile memory of a living person.
It is a staggering leap in efficiency.
So this brings us to the central thesis of our deep dive today. If writing is vastly superior at storing and transmitting information, why didn't humans abandon the cumbersome, biologically demanding practice of music?
Because, as the source text eloquently argues, writing and music were engineered to solve fundamentally different problems.
The dichotomies laid out in the text are incredibly sharp. Writing saves information, music shares experience.
Writing translates thought into a visual abstraction. Music forces bodies into physical synchronization.
Writing bridges vast geographical and temporal distances, allowing a reader to access the thoughts of a dead author. Music forces a group of people to inhabit the exact same microsecond of time.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the crucial distinction is abstraction versus embodiment. Text is a brilliant cognitive technology, but it entirely severs the message from the physical body. To read is to internalize quietly.
Right, you don't move.
But music fundamentally requires the body. It requires lung capacity, vocal cord friction, physical movement, and the biological processing of air pressure waves.
I think of it as the difference between reading a comprehensive menu and physically consuming a complex meal. Text has the capacity to describe an acoustic event.
Sure, it can describe it.
I can read a paragraph that says, the symphony was played at a somber tempo in a minor key, utilizing cellos to evoke a profound sense of mourning. My prefrontal cortex decodes that information, and I understand the concept.
But the text cannot replicate the physical vibration of the cello resonating in your chest cavity.
Exactly. Or the spontaneous release of neurochemicals triggered by the resolution of a dissonant chord.
Text lacks the physical mechanics to induce entrainment. It cannot synchronize the heart rates of an audience. The invention of the alphabet solved the problem of data retention, but humanity still possessed a deep evolutionary need for collective physical synchronization and emotional cohesion.
Writing simply could not service that biological need.
It wasn't built for it.
However, humanity is inherently driven to optimize and capture its environment. Even though text couldn't replace the physical experience of music, there was a relentless drive to somehow pin music down, to capture it visually so it wouldn't just vanish into the ether the moment the singing stopped.
Which initiates a massive technological cascade, beginning with the invention of musical notation.
The attempt to map an acoustic event onto a two-dimensional visual plane.
Translating the invisible properties of sound, the pitch, duration, tempo, rests into a standardized set of visual symbols on parchment. This represents a seismic shift in how humanity interacts with sound.
Prior to formal notation, music was the purely oral and kinetic tradition. It was basically remembered within the neural pathways of the body and transmitted only through direct physical proximity.
Someone had to play it in front of you for you to learn it.
Right. Notation fundamentally changed the ontology of music. It transformed an ephemeral action into a static, reproducible object. It birthed the concept of a musical work.
Which introduces a completely new division of labor. Notation separates the architect of the sound from the builder.
A composer can sit in a silent room in Vienna, meticulously drafting a complex structural blueprint of overlapping melodies and harmonies. Decades later, a group of musicians in London who have never even met the composer can look at that blueprint and reconstruct the exact acoustic architecture in the air.
And when you introduce the mechanical leverage of the printing press to that notation system, the impact is just exponential.
Suddenly, you bypass the bottleneck of monks painstakingly hand-copying manuscripts. You can stamp out thousands of identical copies of a score and distribute them across trade routes.
A specific arrangement of notes can colonize an entire continent without a single musician having to travel.
And the text points out that this spatial distribution creates an entirely new socio-economic ecosystem. You now have publishers mass-producing the blueprints, critics analyzing the structural integrity of the blueprints, and conservatories standardizing exactly how to read them.
The entire music industry begins to form around the visual representation of the sound rather than just the sound itself.
I look at the limitations of that visual representation, though. Notation is an incredible mathematical tool for dictating pitch and duration. It provides the geometry of the song.
The geometry, sure.
But it inherently strips away the microscopic nuances that make music a human experience. A black dot on a staff cannot tell you the specific gritty texture of a vocalist's voice.
It cannot dictate the infinitesimal milliseconds of hesitation a jazz drummer uses to create swing.
Exactly. It strips away the raw, unquantifiable emotion of a live performance on a specific Tuesday night. It captures the skeleton, but it entirely loses the ghost.
That precise limitation, the inability of paper to capture the true acoustic reality, is what drove the next major technological leap. Humanity wanted the ghost.
We always want the ghost.
Always. And that required shifting from archiving the instructions to archiving the physical air pressure changes themselves. It required the recording revolution.
For the entire expanse of human history up to the late 19th century, sound was bound to time. When a sound occurred, it instantly decayed and was lost to entropy. But the invention of the phonograph and subsequently magnetic tape successfully trapped time.
Think about what it is. A stylus literally carving the physical displacement of air molecules into a wax cylinder or a vinyl groove. It is an astonishing physical achievement.
You aren't just transmitting a blueprint, you are freezing the actual acoustic event.
The unique acoustics of the room, the specific timbre of the instruments, the accidental breath of the singer before a note, it is all physically etched into a medium ready to be reconstituted at will.
So what does this all mean? The source text emphasized that this wasn't just a documentary revolution. It fundamentally altered the creative process itself.
Oh, absolutely. The recording medium quickly evolved from a passive archive into an active instrument. The advent of magnetic tape and multi-track recording in the mid-20th century basically shattered the requirement of linear time.
You no longer needed a group of musicians in a single room playing a song perfectly from beginning to end.
Not at all. The studio became a laboratory. You could record the drums on Monday, the bass on Wednesday. You could splice a magnetic tape with a literal razor blade, attaching the chorus from take 4 to the verse from take 9.
You could manipulate the speed, add artificial reverberation, layer 50 vocal tracks on top of each other.
Yeah.
Musicians began constructing acoustic realities that were physically impossible to perform live.
And alongside this manipulation of the recording, you have the mass distribution of the recording via radio transmission.
Which is huge.
The text notes how radio completely redefined the scale of a shared acoustic space. For thousands of years, a shared musical experience was limited by the physical distance sound waves could travel from a source like the campfire or the concert hall.
But radio uses electromagnetic waves to bypass that limit. Suddenly, you have 3 million people sitting in isolated living rooms across an entire continent, receiving the exact same acoustic data at the exact same fraction of a second.
It is a massive, disembodied synchronization of millions of brains.
And as recordings became ubiquitous, they accumulated into a massive historical archive, which leads to the text's focus on the sociocultural phenomenon of sampling, particularly its genesis in hip-hop.
The mechanics of sampling are fascinating. You take a piece of vinyl containing a recording from, say, 1972, a specific isolated drum break.
Right.
You use a sampler, like a Kai MPC, to digitally extract that 1 second of audio. You loop it, manipulate the pitch, and use it as the rhythmic foundation for a completely new vocal performance in 1994.
The text describes it as music eating its own past. The historical archive is no longer just a museum to be observed. It becomes the raw construction material for the present.
Artists are reaching across decades, pulling the acoustic ghosts of deceased musicians into the present to collaborate on new architectural structures.
Time has completely collapsed.
It really is.
I trace the velocity of this evolution, and it's dizzying. We started with vocal cords and hands. Then we pushed the music onto parchment. Then we carved it into vinyl. Then we aligned magnetic particles on tape. Which brings us to the ultimate dematerialization, the digital shift.
The transition from physical object to pure data.
In the modern era, music has largely ceased to be a tangible commodity. You don't own a wax cylinder or a compact disc. Music is a stream of binary code, just ones and zeros, sitting on a massive server farm in another hemisphere, transmitted via fiber optic cables and cellular networks directly to a device in your pocket.
It appears on the surface that music has finally achieved complete abstraction. It has been perfectly externalized into weightless, invisible information.
But the text points out the inescapable biological irony at the end of this journey. We spent millennia engineering technologies to push music outside of our bodies, to store it in the environment, but it can never truly exist outside the body.
Because data is silent.
Exactly. Binary code has no acoustic properties whatsoever. For that digital stream to become music, it must undergo a physical conversion. The digital to analog converter in your phone must translate the code into electrical voltage.
And that voltage must travel through a copper wire to a speaker coil.
Right, the coil interacts with a magnet, physically forcing a speaker cone to rapidly push the air in the room. Those air pressure waves must travel through the space, enter your ear canal, and physically vibrate your tympanic membrane.
It inevitably crashes right back into the biological hardware. The entire vast global infrastructure of digital music distribution is utterly useless without the ancient, wet neurology of the human brain to process the vibration, anticipate the rhythm, and generate the emotional response.
It's a massive technological boomerang.
Huh.
We throw the sound as far away from our bodies as possible into the cloud, into satellite transmissions, but the arc always curves back to the human nervous system.
This raises an important question, and the source text builds to a really powerful synthesis here. If you are listening to the most avant-garde algorithmic electronic music generated by software and streamed from a data center thousands of miles away, you are still entirely reliant on the exact same cognitive mechanisms, the motor cortex entrainment, the prediction error calculations, the acoustic threshold boundaries that our ancestors utilized when striking stones together in a cave.
Which answers the central question we started with at the beginning of the show. Why did humans invent music before writing? The truth is, we didn't sit down and consciously invent it as a discrete tool.
There was no solitary genius who drafted the first song.
No. It was an emergent property of human biology and sociology. Music is the gradual, generational accumulation of our fundamental capacities to hear, to move in synchrony, to process patterns, and to connect deeply with the physical presence of others.
Writing was engineered to store data. Music evolved because we possessed a desperate biological imperative to share space and time with one another. It was the original operating system for human connection. And that ancient code is still running flawlessly beneath every single digital stream we consume today.
The formats have undergone radical transformation, but the underlying organism processing the data remains entirely unchanged.
We're still just human.
We really are. And I want to leave you, the listener, with a final thought to process. Right now, in this exact moment, you are processing the acoustic vibrations of this audio. Your brain is subconsciously analyzing the cadence of my speech. You are anticipating the end of my sentences based on rhythmic patterns.
You are occupying a shared temporal space with us, bridging the physical distance through a digital network.
You are firing the exact same neural pathways that early humans used to synchronize around a fire tens of thousands of years ago. The next time you are sitting in traffic or working at your desk and you find your foot unconsciously tapping to a rhythm, ask yourself, whose ancient evolutionary heartbeat are you actually echoing?